You ever had those sorts of times in your life where something is really annoying you and you don't say anything about it for fear that it might annoy you more? Well, I've been reluctant until now to speak of or about Donald Trump. In part because speaking of someone publicly enlarges their profile, for good or for bad. It enlarges their presence in the public square. I've not wanted to participate in that. However, there comes a time when keeping silent before someone who is a catalyst for bringing out the worst in others becomes a silence of complicity. Now, it would be easy enough for me to now enter into a diatribe against Donald Trump. His dangerous, boorish, narcissistic, nationalistic protectionism. His playing loose and easy with truth, morality, ethics. His admiration of tyrannical systems of absolute power and leadership. His withdrawal from participation in global systems that provide mutual accountability. Even the seemingly ironclad US Constitution, with its instituted system of governance that is designed to protect against misuse and abuse of absolute power, is looking like the thing that it is. A humanly generated document able to be humanly unstitched if you have a person in power willing to disregard it. It would be easy to put all of this onto the persona of Trump and to make him a scapegoat. And I have wanted to do this, to lay the blame entirely at his feet. I have not wanted to face the wider implications of his success. The reality is that Donald Trump is simply a person of no particular stature. But he has been a successful lightning rod for a significant majority, a sufficient majority of the United States. He did not get there by himself, and he is not staying there by himself. Judging by a recent unbridled rhetoric that in the opening of a hockey game in the US that drew chanting crowd support, even though the words he spoke were littered through with lies and twisting of the truth, he is still supported. Trump is a phenomenon who breathes life into something that already exists. He is not creating a way of thinking or of self-understanding in the world. But what he is doing is allowing it voice, allowing it to become incarnate and to have life. As Adrienne Marie Brown, an Afro-American woman, a young woman, writes, "Things are not getting worse, they are getting uncovered. We must hold each other tight and continue to pull back the veil." That Trump is succeeding is so astonishing. We are and have been left speechless, powerless to know how to act to counter the audacity of such raw, unbridled and uneducated access to and misuse of enormous power on the world stage. This phenomena is perpetuated because there are enough people in the US who prefer to live in a world where it is better to look out for yourself, your kin, those who are like you before anybody else. To get what you want regardless of the consequence, to objectify and vilify difference, to have the right to do what you want when you want, to respond with anger in the face of shame, to assume a position of bullying dominance because you perceive that you or your country are superior beyond compare and are answerable and accountable to nobody. Unless it is of your benefit, you decide to negotiate. And even then, you reserve the right to change your mind or lie if you feel like it. You see, there's another reason I have kept silent, and that is from fear that by speaking out against the US in general, I tar with a brush the many and varied, very good people who make up that nation, the many good people who are equally horrified by this phenomenon, and they are resisting actively. They are working to derail this behemoth. Increasingly strong words are being spoken against the Trump phenomenon within the US and the wider world. Even so, the steamroller of the present government is rolling on without check. flattening decade-long relational ties, flaunting international accountability, flexing trade negotiation muscle with impunity without regard for the potential to destabilise global markets. What is being exposed is the enormous vulnerability of our global dependency on one another and of what happens when one member of our globally dependent family decides to not want to belong, or rather believes that their stature grants them the inalienable right to dictate the terms of belonging, unrealistic as that may be. How did it get that way? We are right to be afraid, for fear sharpens us. Fear makes more acute our need to act to preserve life in the face of ready and present danger. Do we feed our fear to the devouring furnace of this Trump phenomena, or do we use it to fuel the fire of our resistance? If we choose to resist, it is time to speak out loud our no to such rhetoric. Make public our dissent. Use the history people of our generation remember. It is we who hold the lived memory of the immoral reality of a totalitarian regime. No human entity, Edwin Friedman writes, is more invasive than the totalitarian nation, equally invasive of the lives of its citizens and the space of its neighbours. Further, he posits, there is almost no example in the history of a sensitive or understanding approach to an invasive nation that successfully staved off a war in the long run. This seems to have been as true for Rome and Carthage, Athens and Sparta, the Allied powers and the Central Powers of World War I, or the Allied powers and the Axis powers of World War II. On the contrary, history is filled with examples of democratic countries trying unsuccessfully to stave off conflict with invasive nations by trying to appease them. The invasive forces get their way because the peace-loving lack the will to confront them. And at this moment, our world is ringed with nations and leaders of such nations. Trump is not alone, even as the US is the last nation we thought to name alongside such companions. It is time to speak out loud our no, and join ourselves with others speaking this way, also willing to act with their fear to resist. It is time to change the rhetoric from hate to hospitality, from fear to trust and the risk of otherness, from scarcity to abundance. And before our hearts turn to scorn before the fairy dust this sounds like in the face of the real and present danger we are in, let me remind you, the terms of rhetoric that would dismiss this a fairy dust are the ones presently determining what is real and what truth is and what is possible. We don't have to agree to a world on such Trump phenomena terms. We do need to be clear-eyed to see such rhetoric for what it is. But let me tell you a story. Let me tell you a story about a woman who was almost without hope, incurably ill, rendered invisible, nameless, and unseen. Unsuccessfully, she had tried absolutely everything to be cured. She had spent all her money, she had received all the wisdom from all the healers in her world. Still, she sought wholeness. Still, she held a thread of hope that she could be made whole. One day, she heard tell of a person in whose presence God seemed made real. This person happened to be passing through her town. So in hope, she joined the crowds that came to see. And as the person passed her, she reached out, she brushed their clothing, and she knew herself made whole. The story could end there, but the frame freezes. The person in whose presence God seems made real stops. Being made whole changed not only this woman. The God presence one experienced it also and was changed. The woman is asked to make herself known, to become visible, to speak her story. Her wholeness is made real, we discover, because she held a thread of hope for wholeness and for what could be made real by joining herself to the life of God present in her world. She's not the only one I heard about in a story today who held tight to a thread of hope despite overwhelming derision and disbelief, held tight to what can be made real in the world when we humans have courage and humility to join ourselves to the life of God in the world. But that story of the woman and the healing, did it change the world, that small act? You might challenge. But notice a couple of things here. Wholeness and healing are not done to either of those in the story today. Each one who seeks healing holds the thread of hope, steps toward and initiates the relationship from which their wholeness comes. Wholeness is the outcome of their decision to step toward and step into relationship. There is no divine intervention that pops in and does something to them. Holding the thread of hope and stepping toward that which brings life in the midst of apparent hopelessness changes us. It changes the way we understand the world. It changes how we live. It changes what is possible. It also reminds us that much of what we experience in the world is the result of the choices that we make and we have made. It is not done to us. It's a sort of story today that we gather around. But it's one story. Our story is one among many. With urgency, we must gather with others of many and different stories and together say no. It might just be that the preservation of our humanity and the future of the planet depends on us doing this together. We need one another. We are mutually vulnerable, whether we like it or not. As Adrian Brown continues, we must deepen our connections to each other. There is no way the majority of us will survive this time if we continue working in isolation or in competition. We must meet at the intersections and lovingly figure out how to be in right relationship. We need the largest and most authentic collaborative efforts for justice and liberation that have ever been witnessed on this planet. We must increase our collective tolerance for truth. We must take the risk of leading. Not only are we the ones we have been waiting for, but this is the exact moment we have been shaped for. The veil never hid us from others. It only ever hid us from ourselves. Now that more of us can see who we truly are, we must begin or continue to move towards who we truly want and need to be in order to sustain life on this planet. Liberation, she says, is no small task. It is appropriately daunting for miraculous beings. It is a gift to be given such undeniable purpose, such immense odds. Hold each other tight and let us do this work.